A few months ago, I had started planning for a 1,000 subscriber special, a history of me and my involvement in the fandom. Like a historian's version of a Draw My Life, I thought, and thus I scheduled it for February 2021. At the rate my channel was growing, I was expecting to hit 1,000 subs a little before that time. But then something insane happened. My channel began picking up steam while I was on my hiatus to work on the Christmas animation, and not long after, I came back with 3,000 subscribers, which is where I sit now. So I suppose this is now my 3,000 sub special. Hello Furs from the web, my name is Scar, and this is the story of ScarTheFur. Stay tuned. Long before I was a furry, my interest in anthropomorphism started blooming. I don't know what necessarily started my furriness, because it was never apparent for a long time. But I do know when I first started involving it with my personal self. I was a much different kid from who I am now, in many different ways. But one thing that has not changed is my creativity. My older sister, who is a prominent figure in my life, introduced me into many different things. One day, she showed me some of the characters she was creating in her mind. I don't remember much about them, except for the fact that there was 2 of them, and I think one of them might have been a dragon. This is some pretty fuzzy memories for me. However, it was my motivation to create my own imaginary characters, leading to the birth of Guko, Venom, and Claws, my 3 oldest characters. These 3 would actually become the foundation for more to follow. When I was in 3rd grade, the name ScarTheFur was birthed from a warrior cat's name generator, and attaching my lucky number 72 onto the end. ScarTheFur became an imaginary character as well, being based upon myself. During my middle school years, I began to expand the idea of this character, as well as some of the others I had been creating through my notebooks and spare time. By the end of my freshman year, I had brainstormed a world that begun with the end. Interdimensional protectors that were massacred except for one last team. After the team fell apart, ScarTheFur, also known as the Last Warrior, became tasked with recruiting an army to take on the encroaching Dr. Dread. This was something I actively roleplayed on my own throughout my freshman year during high school recess, culminating in the final battle that I scheduled at the end of my school year. During this, I would write origins for my 3 old characters and give them purpose. I also developed 3 new characters, Andy, Inferno, and eventually Spike. Once my roleplay finale came, it was over. But I didn't want it to be over. So I began writing future eras. Over time, I have refined this narrative, although only the first 2 eras are fully developed. Ultimately, this expansive continuity of lore and characters would become an umbrella for my future endeavors, known as the Warrior story. These characters were the beginning of my interest in anthroculture, though, and would lead to just how much I associate with my persona and the lore of him. Moving into my sophomore year, I had finally been introduced fully into the world of technology and the internet. I had been quite a bit my freshman year, but not as invested in exploring online as I would become. An anime, one of the first I ever watched, caught my attention after seeing montage moment videos on YouTube. This anime I would watch in English before rewatching the last season in Japanese after seeing how much the English dub kinda screwed over the finale. This anime was Sonic X. Not only was I invested in these characters, I went to have a mega fan phase where I began getting into fan art, and I became almost obsessed with the games. Sonic was the first time I ever felt silly for liking something. The first time I was almost embarrassed by how attached I got to fictional plotlines, and the first time I was ever so passionate for a world that wasn't my own. Excluding Halo, because Halo was awesome. The different personalities and exaggerated designs were both adorable, but almost powerful to me. Everything changed the end of that year, though, when I watched Zootopia upon release. The movie, which instantly became one of my favorites, would lead me to finding the furry fandom. Looking up reviews led to fan art led me to DeviantArt, and that DeviantArt would lead me to the Fur Affinity forums. This is when I became self-aware of my interest in anthropomorphism, but there was something stronger. The pull-in promise of one of the best communities out there. I discovered the fandom on April 2nd of 2016, and would spend the next 2 days researching the absolute heck out of the community. I saw the good, the bad, the inspiring, and the terrifying. After some early engagements with the community, I was hooked. On April 4th, 2016, I made a Fur Affinity forum account and officially joined the fandom. My very first days of the fandom were spent looking through the online resources and engaging in public threads. Sites that especially drew my attention were Ask Papa Bear, Fur Science, and Furry Dolphin. On my first day, I also ran across an account known as all#the#fur. He was another furry about my age, and created a chat room with a handful of other people he had found. This chat included Trinity, Electro, Nitrogen, Ignis, Chiari, and me. Chiari would quickly become inactive, leaving it to just us 5, the group I refer to as the First 5. We would continue to grow as friends, and in some ways almost like a family throughout the rest of the spring and summer that year. I probably had an easier time developing my persona than most. Scar as a name was already synonymous with myself, and breaking it away from the full name of Scar Class 72, it worked well enough. Scar on its own, though, was way too simplistic, a name that would get lost in a sea of ones like it. Scar the Cat didn't roll off the tongue clean enough for me, neither did Scar the Kit, and thus, ScarTheFur was born. Species was the easy part. Not only had I grown up with cats more than I had dogs, I felt a connection with them that was almost unexplainable. A connection that would later change my beliefs on identity, but at the time it was definitely enough to create my avatar from. Scar's original design was very basic, with an inward-facing Scar and a solid pelt of blue fur. Within a month, this was taken further, keeping the simple design principles but adding some unique features so he would become easily identifiable in a crowd and iconic in a sense. Green stitch-shaped birthmarks and a lighter shade of blue fur added onto the pelt. Plantigrade, a lack of whiskers, and an outfit identical to my casual wear. The only changes made in the years since is his shirt coloring and the addition of a pendant. After coming out of the furry closet to first my brother and second my father, I managed to convince him to take me to a convention downstate. On May 28th, I attended Great Lakes FurCon 2016. This was my first ever and so far only furry convention, and it was an absolute blast. I got to see a lot of fursuiters, I bought my own tail, and I even bumped into one of my favorite small furry YouTubers at the time, Dune the Fox. Some videos from the convention became some of my first real content on my new second YouTube channel, known as ScarTheFur. I had been doing YouTube for roughly 2 years already, learning my way around things, and starting up my furry channel was a decision made to separate my content from ScarClaw. Not only did it help focus my content, it drew a line between the channel that most of my in-person friends and family were familiar with at the time, and a side of my life that very few people knew about. In my early days of the fandom, I was enthusiastic to begin making my own related content after experiencing the plethora of work I had seen from others. Some early canned works include an article talking about how young furs can talk with their parents about the fandom, and a video talking about my first impressions on the fandom. My early creative endeavors mostly took the form of artwork, either drawing for myself or for others who wanted it. This was an evolution of my Sonic fan art, and was something I actually was much more comfortable sharing around. My furry channel's early content featured an inconsistent lineup including speed colors, meme edits, and the occasional rough scripted video, along with vlogs. A year or so down the road, I would end up getting involved with an author group known as Dragoon Dreamers. Through them, I would publish a chapbook of poems that documented many personal events from later in the Amino Days. Things would change down the line, but my primary focus in the fandom in these days was just socializing. The almost family-like connections I developed among the first 5 changed me in a number of ways. Furry opened up a social door for me that I had never experienced before and taught me many things. Many of these things I will probably talk about in a future milestone video, but the most important was how it affected my relationship with a very old friend who I simply refer to by his initials, TR. TR used to be one of my greatest friends. In fact, I'm willing to say he was the best friend I had ever had to that point. Not only did he bring me a unique connection during a time when I was socially inexperienced, but he brought me into a small community of friends. I say he used to because he passed away just a few months after I met him, dissolving the group and leaving me in a worse place than I had began. A place I remained in mostly until the fandom backdoored it for me, offering a new opportunity for me to try again. Furry has done a lot for me, especially in my early days, and this is just the prime example. The Fur Affinity forums were truly my golden days in the fandom, but things were going to expand more. The fandom's involvement was going to become an even bigger part of my life, and it was all because of one new platform. Amino was a platform that launched in 2014. It was a weird mix of so many different social medias, allowing for fandoms to create in-depth communities with a large variety of features. Furry Amino was founded in June of 2016. Towards the end of July, Trinity told everyone of this new platform. Not only was it a great social hub, but it would be a lot more practical than using the forum we had chatted on for so long. On July 21st, he joined. Over the next 2 weeks, the rest of us would migrate over as well. I officially logged into the platform for the first time on August 9th. A few months later, Furry Amino would surge in popularity with everybody and their mother knowing about it. A plethora of YouTubers reported on it, sharing Furry Amino to an even wider audience. The floodgates had opened, and Furry Amino would begin its golden age. FA was largely populated by casual chats and roleplay groups. While the first 5 would remain in our own private chat, we expanded into public spaces. One of the first public roleplay chats we became involved with was one that Ignis hosted, a sleepover RP. It was during this that I would meet another one of my best friends in the fandom, Luna Sky. Many other faces would become friends, leading to a social bloom for myself. Unfortunately, as time would pass, Electro would fade into obscurity, and Trinity would vanish for long periods of time before disappearing completely. Me, Ignis, and Nitro also became regulars in the 2 longest-running public roleplay chat rooms, Chord's Bar and the Rabbit Hole. This bar and nightclub had major overlap in attendance, and even the 2 owners were great friends for a long time. Roleplay became a huge part of my life. The highlight of my day was coming home from high school and just hanging around and getting up to random shenanigans with a wide cast of characters. During these months, Luna and I shared an interest for deeper lore and began developing our characters. An entire world and kingdom called Lumoria came to be, being a foundation for future projects. Scar also developed electrical powers, and throughout the months of roleplay would go from barely being able to control anything to gaining an intermediate level of mastery that became integral to his character. Amino was not without its downsides, though. The golden age ended for me and many others when the foundations of these chat rooms became shaky. Drama was rampant, and it would ultimately tear up a lot of friendships and full relationships. This wasn't big drama like we see in the fandom nowadays. This was just teenage friendship drama. Nonetheless, a long chain of events would lead to chat rooms degrading, but this was just the top of the slope. Amino still had steam in 2017, but was really when the golden age had ended for myself. Amino was my home in the fandom, and I was watching it go through a major shift. Amino was slowly moving away from the social hub and more into a commission market and a meme pool. It also became host to many of the issues that would lead to its major decline. I continued being engaged in Furry YouTube, and occasionally returning to the Fur Affinity forums as well as Furry teens to branch out. 2017 was a big year for me outside the fandom, as I was transitioning into my senior year of high school. Plans to attend Great Lakes FurCon again fell through once the con was cancelled, and would never see the light of day again. Across the year, friends would begin to one by one leave the platform, and in many cases the fandom due to negative experiences with the app. Except for a handful of close friends, the social side of the app was dying, and unfortunately there was going to be no recovery. 2018 was one of the loneliest years of my life. My place in Furrydom was in question, and I actually began to fade away from Furry Amino quite a bit. My involvement in the fandom dipped dramatically. There was a lot of personal things, such as graduating, learning to drive, and going to college. I ended up beginning to take an interest in fandom history. For a long time, the history of furries was something that had never crossed my mind. It didn't seem like a popular subject either. My guess was that since the fandom was a more casual or in-the-moment thing for many people, its history wasn't something that most would pay attention to. In the recesses of old websites and articles, though, I was awestruck in finding about how the fandom started. How the core ideals many furries have today could be traced back to a small group of friends, pretty much. It was this interest that would carry me into my future in the fandom. And it all started with discovering the Furry Music Foundation. One of the things that it really intrigued me during my early days in the fandom was the Furry Music Foundation. Not only was it something that felt like had been lost to the recesses of history, it had a lot of charming tracks and it struck a really good chord with me. In particular, Jumpy, who easily became my favorite musician of all time simply because of his few lyrical songs. Winged Angels, For a Cat, The Storyteller's Lament, Not Quite Silence, and my favorite song of all time, Dragonfire, just managed to check so many personal boxes that no one else and no other group has managed to reach before or since. Although Aviators does come a little bit close. Lost in a fandom that seemed to have never heard of or even care about these massive pieces of history, I began working on a new project for my YouTube channel that documented the story. I played with the idea of creating a short series where I talked about each major furry musician, but they ended up merging into one massive video. Alongside this, I began preparing work for an archival project where I would upload the Furry Music Foundation's work to YouTube and make all the remaining music available for download. This would become the Furry Music Archive. The first video idea finally came to fruition when I started working on the script in early 2019, after having planned it for almost a year. The video took many weeks to edit, but helped found the blueprint for my future work. This video released in May 2019 and received positive reception. I began work on 2 smaller videos, MFF 2014 Chlorine Con, and a video talking about the burn furs. The burn furs was one of my first major hitting points for the older days of the fandom that I had come across. My knowledge was limited, so in many regards I kept some of the videos more safe with my wording. Making these history videos gave me a new purpose and interest in the fandom, though. It was both motivating me to research something I was so interested in, and it got me back into content creation for the fandom. After my Syrian refugee video, I planned on taking a look into the precursor movements of the burn furs, but the scope increased. One of my first major inspirations and influences was a long document on furrydolphin.net, which told a lot about the 90s fandom. I made a video talking about this era, the precursor to the internet fandom that we were so accustomed to. What started out titled as From Birth to Burn Fur would later become the Furry Renaissance. This video premiered in the beginning of 2020 and would begin my big journey for that year. While I did have smaller history videos, I would return again to an entire era of the fandom where I talked about the golden age of furry. In the process of making this video, I became inspired to dedicate a video to each definable era of the fandom. These timeline videos serve to help give a thorough understanding of the fandom's entire lifespan, and act as a base for future content to align with. Throughout the remainder of 2020, I talked about the grassroots of the fandom, the abuse by the media, the massive growth with the widespread World Wide Web, and the political war that the fandom currently finds itself in. These videos were my biggest ambition since my first jump with furry music, and helped cement my place and confidence in becoming a real furry historian. In mid to late 2019, I received a comment on my burn fur videos from a creator known as Kit the Soulless. He enjoyed my content and decided to give my channel a shout out. I did join his Discord and welcomed myself around the server, but it quickly became lost in my sea of others. I returned toward the beginning of 2020, only to find myself in the middle of a tough situation with one of his fur family members. I did offer to help out, because honestly, I was in a position to when I thought I should. That changed when I learned how wrong I was, with the end of January putting me in crisis mode when my family's apartment turned out to be infested. We basically bled money having to stay in cheap motels while we searched for a new home, since we had no way to pay for an exterminator. Because it was the off-season, the hotels were extremely cheap, and that was the only reason we were able to stay in them in the first place. And most of our family members had pretty much turned their backs on us for the moment. In the middle of it, my mother's fiancé, who had only been trying to ignore the massive problem, ended up leaving, taking our only vehicle. I was forced to leave my job, and I was being blasted for my original conference video by its founders, and I was demoted from my staff position on Freedonia. Overall, things were pretty shitty. Things did work out though, and while I was forced to sideline myself because of my own crises, I guess my attitude hadn't gone unnoticed. After months of becoming friends and with many of the people in Kit's circle, I officially became a member of the family. There was a lot more personal weight in the decision, but it's one that I'm grateful for and have not regretted saying yes to. I'm even very recently been able to prove my original word by basically helping out in the same way I originally planned on, leaving a mark for myself and the family. I have a video talking about my own history of furry families, but being in this family and getting involved with Kit's fan base gave me a new social space in the fandom, and a tight circle I was welcomed and engaged in. The remaining few of us from the Amino Days also met up on Discord eventually, opening a DM. It's amazing being able to keep in touch with some of my oldest friends of the fandom, and almost all of them I'm still extremely close with. I have rebounded from my rough years in the fandom, and at the point of writing this video, I would actually consider to be in as positive of a place of the fandom as I was during my first year. I'm as happy as I was then, and after such a long, lonely break, it feels amazing. I feel reunited with the fandom core ideals in a sense, and it's not something I ever want to let go. The cherry on top was what happened in the last months of 2020. After I finished up my last timeline videos, I began transitioning to work on my Christmas animation for my other channel. Unfortunately, my end of the year schedule was delayed to hell since I contracted COVID-19 in November. While I was recovering though, something insane happened. My growth on this channel began to skyrocket, and I mean skyrocket. Unfortunately, I couldn't capitalize on it since I was so wrapped up in the project, but the momentum kept going until I hit 3,000 subscribers, and well, here we are. The future for this channel looks bright with a proper schedule and a long list of content in my queue. So that is the long-winded history of me and the fandom. I hope you all learned something interesting and enjoyed the video. Coming up next is a review of 2016's Personas documentary, directed by Dominic Rodriguez. The next history video will be looking back on To the Ranting Griffin, a longtime member of the fandom best known for his comedy career. Until next time, guys, stay tuned.